So this is part 2 of the chapter and the slide presentations on pesticides and organic chemicals. And this is much more detailed, more specific about different types of chemicals. There are 4 classes of pesticides and insecticides derived from organic chemicals. If you go back to our last set of slides, we define what an organic chemical is. It's a chemical that has carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen. Organophosphates, organocarbamates, organochlorides, and pyrethroids are all different classes of pesticides derived from organic chemicals. Organophosphate pesticides, or anticholinesterases, can be used to control a wide range of insects. They tend not to persist in the environment, but they can be the frequent cause of fatal poisonings because they're very toxic. Anticholinesterase activity happens soon after exposure, causes impairment of neural impulse. Long-term effects could be conditions like polyneuropathy, which is numbness, loss of sensory abilities, and weakness. A couple of examples of different types of organophosphate pesticides include diazinon, malathion, methylparathione, and parathione. They appear in a wide range of products: sprays, baits, foggers, bombs, flea collars, powders. Malathion hasn't been approved for application to food crops, such as fruits and vegetables. Carbamates are another close relative of the organophosphate pesticides. They dissipate quickly and they break down into other substances. They've been approved for controlling garden pests like snails, and they are in some products applied to furry pets to control ticks and fleas. Examples include carbyl or 7, aldicarb, phenoxycarb, propoxur, and metamsodium. Methyl isocyanate is a chemical used for the manufacture of carbamate pesticides. It's extremely toxic, and it's not a chemical that's intentionally applied, but as you're developing or making pesticides, this is one of the products that is used. In the production of pesticides in India, there was an accidental release of methyl isocyanate in 1984 that killed more than 3,000 people in Bhopal. It's one of the very important examples of lack of protection for the population and a release of a chemical that was unintended. The company was not adequately fined, and there's still concern about that chemical release in the environment because that incident was so severe and terrible. Metamsodium is an example of chemical spilled into a river. When we have chemicals like this that we use on a large scale that are produced in mass, have to either be packaged for distribution or used in large-scale farming operations or agricultural operations, we have to transport these chemicals. And occasionally trains derail and the chemical gets released into the environment. Organochlorines are chlorinated hydrocarbons, chemical compounds, right, that have carbon and hydrogen and contain chlorine. They're stable and fat soluble, which means they'll persist in the environment and bioaccumulate in the food chain. We've seen them associated with suppression of the immune system and also associated with cancer. And trichloroethylene is an example of an organochlorine, not used as a pesticide, but as a chemical in the environment that we've examined. Examples of organochlorine pesticides include DDT, which we've talked about, lindane, chlorine, chlordane, Mirex, hexachlorobenzene, methoxychlor. Dichlorodiphenyl trichloroethane is what DDT stands for. It was used in the early 20th century to combat mosquito-borne diseases in the United States and elsewhere. But in 1972, the United States began to prohibit the application of DDT. As a result, many other nations in the world banned the use of DDT because of its long-lasting impacts on the environment, unintended consequences. Some countries still use DDT, but the banning of DDT has been questioned as how it's impacted the control of malaria worldwide. Because for many years, DDT was used to control mosquitoes in places where malaria was prevalent, like sub-Saharan Africa. And when DDT was banned, we lost control of the malaria epidemic. In places now, we've decided to reinstitute indoor residual spraying of DDT to control mosquitoes and malaria. DDT has not been regarded as a highly toxic pesticide like some of the other things that we've talked about. But as I mentioned, it had been employed worldwide to control insects, and specifically mosquitoes that carry malaria. It was credited with saving millions of lives because of its ability to control malaria. However, it concentrates in the fatty tissues of the body, and its estimated half-life is approximately 10 years. So there's evidence that every living organism on Earth has some exposure to this pesticide. It has been linked to long-term exposure like cancer, reproductive effects, impaired lactation, falling sperm counts, neurologic function. Pyrethrins are substances that are derived from natural sources, like flowers. They have the ability to paralyze and kill insects, and they interfere with transmission of neural impulses. They have low concentrations, can be used inside, often applied directly to humans, but as a result may be inhaled or ingested in foods. Lastly, I want to talk about some examples of herbicides and defoliants. They can be classified as atrazine, paraquat, and Agent Orange. Agent Orange is well known in the environment for being a chemical that was used during the Vietnam War to give the United States an ability to see soldiers in the forested areas of Vietnam, in the very tropical forests of Vietnam. So if they added this defoliant, the leaves would fall off, and it was sprayed very broadly in Vietnam War. Approximately 19 million gallons of this was sprayed all over Vietnam and Laos, and it was found that some of it contained other chemicals, including dioxins. The Institute of Medicine did a study demonstrating there was enough evidence that Agent Orange was associated with several forms of cancer: soft tissue, Hodgkin's lymphoma, Hodgkin's disease, and lymphocytic leukemia. So when we start to think about chemicals in our environment that we may be exposed to, we should identify who's most at risk and how to protect them. For pesticide exposure, broadly speaking, insecticides, herbicides, rodenticides, etc. Agricultural workers, of course, because they're often applying pesticides. Pets are at risk of exposure. Children, either because the dose that they receive on foods that they eat is higher than it would be for adults, or because they're doing behaviors that put them more at risk for exposure. Livestock, and then of course we're concerned about subpopulations that might be more at risk, like pregnant women because of fetal exposure. Lastly, we'll talk about dioxins, which is a compound that are unintentionally produced in various processes, usually involving combustion. Biopesticides are pesticides derived from natural materials like bacteria or mineral. There are microbial biopesticides plant-incorporated protectants, and biochemical pesticides. There are more than 400 compounds in the dioxin family, but only a handful or a few dozen are considered to be poisonous. Major challenges, though, if they're stable and persistent, they can bioaccumulate within the food chain. Some natural events produce dioxins: combustion due to forest fires or volcanic eruption, and these are background levels. There are some human activities that can produce dioxins as well: incineration or burning of industrial and municipal wastes, burning of fossil fuels, some fuels, bleaching of pulp to make paper, and manufacturing some herbicides, as well as combustion of tobacco. The health effects associated with these depend on how long, how frequently, when, and the concentration and the route that it enters: inhalation, ingestion, or dermal. We can see skin rash, body hair growth, liver damage. There's some evidence of cancer risk, and effects on the endocrine system as well as the reproductive and developmental systems. Two more chemicals that we'll talk about before the end of this presentation: polychlorinated biphenyls. This has often been used as a fluid to insulate electric equipment. It's basically non-flammable material. We've found, though, that these are hazardous in the environment and they accumulate and they impact human health. We find them in many sites across the U.S. They've been put on Superfund or National Priorities List sites, and we stopped making them because of the concerns of their health effects, which include cancer, possibly in humans, documented in animals. We may see immune system, reproductive system, and intellectual developmental system problems. And it may limit immune responses to viral infections. The last group that we'll talk about is organic solvents, substances capable of dissolving other substances, and it doesn't change in solution. Main ways for exposure of solvents are breathing the vapors from them. Many of the solvents are volatile organic compounds, which means that the chemical itself becomes a vapor at room temperature and pressure. You can ingest contaminated food or water. Trichloroethylene is a good example of a solvent that was used that can result in contamination of water. They may be found in some products that we use. Cigarettes, of course, another route of exposure. Working in a factory where you may be working with solvents to remove grease from metals. And as I mentioned, drinking water can get contaminated by these solvents. Tetrachloroethylene, trichloroethylene, trichloroethane, toluene, acetone, and benzene are all examples of solvents. If you've ever removed nail polish, acetone is the solvent that removes the nail polish from your nails. Chemicals used in plastics manufacture are called styrenes. We can use polystyrene resins. Inhalation of these can impact the nervous system, produce problems concentrating, irritate the respiratory tract, and there may be links to cancer. Another chemical used in making plastics is vinyl chloride. It's a main ingredient in pipes, vinyl siding for houses, plastic coating, and it's a known human carcinogen. Lastly, we'll talk about a group of chemicals called environmental estrogens. These are chemicals that have estrogenic activity. The body sees them as an estrogen, even though it's not a hormone being produced by the body. DDT and its metabolites, or how it breaks down, have sometimes been called an endocrine disruptor, and it has these ability to produce hormone signals that are not really being produced by the body. How this may influence our health is abnormal influences on the reproductive system have been documented in humans and animals, and it may act as a cancer promoter by influencing the onset of cancers thought to be related to estrogens, like breast cancer or cervical cancer or ovarian cancer, etc.